Douglas Pratt snatched a glass of Merlot off the table and hurled it straight into the black janitor's chest. Wine exploded across gray fabric. 80 forks froze. Jazz piano choked into silence. The manager charged over, not to help. He clawed the apron off the janitor's body, slammed it to the floor, and barked, "Get out!" The janitor didn't flinch. His fists clenched so tight his knuckles paled beneath dark skin, but his eyes stayed locked on the manager. Then a waitress slammed her tray down so hard the glasses rattled. She marched across the dining room, snatched the apron off the floor, and shoved it back into the janitor's hands. She spun toward the manager.
He doesn't deserve this.
She planted herself between them like a wall, shielding a stranger she'd never spoken to, a man everyone in that room had already written off. And that waitress had no idea her whole life was about to change. Have you ever watched someone's arrogance collapse in real time because you were about to drop a comment, hit that like? And let me take you back to where it all started. But before that night, before the wine and the silence and the moment that split her life in two, there was just Elena. Elena Underwood woke up at 4:50 every morning, not to an alarm, to habit. The kind that crawls into your bones when you've done it so long, your body doesn't bother asking permission anymore. She splashed cold water on a face most people never really looked at, which was a shame. A sharp V-line jaw that curved into a chin so delicate it looked sculpted from porcelain. High cheekbones that caught the light even under the bathroom's cheap fluorescent bulb. Sea blue eyes, not gray blue, not green blue. The kind of deep ocean blue that shifted a shade darker when she was tired and a shade brighter when she laughed. Framed by lashes so long they cast small shadows on her cheeks when she blinked. A straight nose, a soft Cupid's bow, and skin so clear it made the women at the Belmont spend $300 a month trying to imitate with serums and facials what Elena got from genetics and cold water. Dark brown hair, thick, slightly wavy at the ends, she pulled into a loose ponytail still damp from the sink. When it was down, which was almost never, it fell past her shoulders like something out of a shampoo commercial she'd never be able to afford. 25 years old, and the kind of beautiful that made men forget their orders mid-sentence, and women glance twice in the mirror after she walked past. But Elena never noticed. She moved too fast. 14-hour shifts don't leave room for vanity. No makeup, no jewelry, no perfume. Just dish soap on her palms and a faint trace of hospital antiseptic under her nails. The only thing she carried that wasn't practical was her face, and she treated that like an accident she didn't have time to think about. By 5:30, she was at the Belmont Grand, apron on, notepad out, smile ready. The same faded black apron she'd worn for 2 years, washed so many times the stitching frayed along the edges. Shoes worn flat at the heels from 12-hour shifts that started with breakfast and ended long after the kitchen lights went dark. She carried plates that cost more than her weekly groceries, poured wine she couldn't afford to smell, smiled at men who looked through her the way people look through glass, useful, invisible, forgettable. Elena didn't complain. She couldn't afford to. Not with her father's hospital bills stacking up on the kitchen counter like a slow-building wall. Henry Underwood, 58, former carpenter, hands that once shaped oak and walnut into furniture people kept for generations, now too weak to grip a handrail without shaking. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease had eaten his lungs piece by piece over 6 years. Some days he sat up in his hospital bed and talked about the wood shop. Some days he just breathed slow, rattling breaths that sounded like a door hinge rusting shut. On his bedside table sat a small wooden bird. A finch carved from a single block of maple. His last piece. He'd started it the week before his hands began trembling too hard to hold the chisel. Elena found it unfinished in his workshop, brought it to the hospital, set it where he could see it every morning. He never asked her to finish it. She never offered. They both knew what it meant. $4,200 a month. That was the number. Insurance covered 60%. The rest fell on Elena. Every tip, every double shift. Every smile she forced at tables full of people who snapped their fingers instead of using her name. All of it poured into a gap that never got smaller. She visited Henry every day between shifts, brought him soup from the hospital cafeteria, read his charts, wrote down his medication schedule in a notebook she kept in her apron pocket, the same pocket where other waitresses kept lipstick. Her fingertips always had ink stains. Her nails were clipped short. She smelled like dish soap and antiseptic. One evening, when Elena was 10, she helped her father deliver a hand-built bookshelf to a client's home. The client, a man in a polo shirt with a country club tan, pointed at Henry's sawdust-covered jeans and told his wife, "Just let the help set it down and get him out." Henry didn't say a word. He placed the bookshelf, collected his check, and drove home. Elena asked why he wasn't angry. Henry looked at her in the rearview mirror and said something she never forgot. "A man's work doesn't define his worth, sweetheart. How people treat the working man that defines theirs." Elena carried that sentence like a scar, invisible, permanent. And on a Friday night at the Belmont Grand, when a black janitor stood dripping wine in front of 80 silent faces, that scar burned. Nathan Caldwell had not always been the man with the mop. 2 years earlier, he sat in a corner office on the 38th floor of Caldwell Tower in Manhattan. 27 years old, black, built like a former college swimmer who never stopped training, 6'2", broad shoulders that tapered into a narrow waist. The kind of proportions tailors loved and other men resented. Arms that filled a dress shirt without trying. A neck that held his head like it was engineered for confidence. His face was the problem, or the advantage, depending on who was looking. A jaw so sharp and defined it could have been drawn with a straight edge. Cheekbones set high and wide, giving his face a structure that photographers would have killed for. Dark brown eyes, deep, almost black in low light, framed by lashes so thick they softened every hard angle on his face and made him look gentle even when he wasn't smiling. Full lips. A nose with a clean bridge and a slight flare at the nostrils that gave him an air of quiet intensity. His skin was deep espresso smooth, even-toned, the kind of black skin that glowed under warm light like it had been polished. When he smiled, which was rare, a single dimple appeared on his left cheek, just one, asymmetrical, disarming. The kind of detail that made women lose their train of thought and pretend they hadn't. His hair was cut low, a clean fade on the sides, tight curls on top, lined up with surgical precision. He kept it sharp, the way a man keeps something sharp when it's one of the few things about himself he can still control. 27, and the kind of handsome that didn't ask for attention, but couldn't avoid it. The kind that made boardrooms uncomfortable and elevators quiet. In a suit, he looked like old money. In a janitor's uniform, he looked like a mistake the universe made putting that face on a man holding a mop. But nobody at the Belmont looked close enough to notice, because nobody ever looks twice at the janitor. He inherited 5 hotels from his grandfather at 21. By 25, he'd turned 5 into 42. Caldwell Grand Hotels stretching from Boston to San Diego, $3.6 billion in assets, 12,000 employees. Nathan built it with 80-hour weeks, hands-on renovations, and a rule he never broke: no press, no photos, no public appearances. The CFO handled the cameras, the board handled the handshakes. Nathan handled everything else from behind a wall of NDAs and private entrances. Nobody outside the company knew his face. That was the point. And then there was Vanessa. Vanessa Thornton walked into his life at a charity gala in the Hamptons. Green eyes, warm laugh. The kind of woman who made a room feel smaller just by standing in it. 3 years together. Sunday mornings reading in bed. Late-night calls when he was stuck at a hotel site in another city. He loved her the way only someone who'd spent his whole life building things could love completely structurally, with every load-bearing wall exposed. 1 week before the wedding, his legal team found the blueprints she'd drawn behind his back. A prenuptial loophole, a private attorney. Text messages to her best friend, timestamped 3 months into the relationship. 2 more years than freedom with $500 million. She hadn't loved him, she'd appraised him. Nathan canceled the wedding quietly. No headlines, no lawsuits. He sat alone in the penthouse that night and stared at the Manhattan skyline, 42 hotels glittering across the country, and not one person in his life he could trust. That was the night the idea took root. If money was all people saw, he'd remove it. Strip away the suits, the watch, the cars, the name. Stand in front of the world as nothing. A black man in a janitor's uniform, pushing a mop, and see who still treated him like a human being. He started in Boston, Caldwell, Grand Beacon Hill, posed as a maintenance worker for 2 weeks. The night manager was skimming liquor inventory. A front desk clerk mocked a guest's accent to her face. Nathan documented everything in a leather journal he kept in his back pocket. Flew home, sent the report. The hotel was restructured within a month. Miami. A head chef pocketing supplier kickbacks. Fired. Chicago. Housekeeping staff bullied by a floor supervisor who screamed at them in the stairwell. Replaced. Dallas. Denver. Seattle. Portland. 11 cities. 8 months. Every hotel he touched got better. But Nathan wasn't just auditing operations. He was watching people. Hundreds of them. Managers, waiters, bellhops, guests, bartenders. He watched how they looked at him when he mopped, how they spoke to him when they needed something cleaned, how they treated a black man in gray coveralls who had no title, no power, no voice. Not one offered him a meal. Not one asked his name. Not one said thank you after he scrubbed their bathroom floor on his knees. A few looked through him like air. Most looked at him like dirt. Some didn't look at all. 11 hotels. Hundreds of faces. 0. The leather journal had a blank page at the back. Nathan had left it there on purpose, reserved for one name. The name of someone who saw him, not the billionaire, not the CEO, just him. 8 months later, that page was still white. The Belmont Grand in Atlanta was supposed to be the last stop, the final test, the end of the road. Nathan tied his boots, pulled on the gray uniform, and walked through the service entrance. He told himself he wasn't hoping anymore. The Belmont Grand smelled like old money and fresh lilies. Nathan walked through the service entrance at 6:15 on a Monday morning. A woman in HR handed him a gray uniform, a lanyard with no photo, and a key to the supply closet on sublevel 2. She didn't shake his hand, didn't tell him where to eat lunch, didn't introduce him to a single person on staff. She pointed at the elevator and said, "Floors 1 through 4, start with the lobby restrooms." That was his welcome. The restaurant occupied the entire ground floor. Amber chandeliers, dark oak tables, leather chairs that probably cost more than Elena's monthly rent. By noon, the dining room hummed with clinking glass and low laughter from men in tailored suits and women dripping gold. And through the center of it all, a black man in a wrinkled gray uniform pushed a mop bucket on squeaky wheels, head down, invisible. Nathan noticed everything. The manager noticed him first. Craig Bellman, late 30s. Hair slicked back with enough gel to waterproof a boat. A charcoal suit that tried too hard, the fabric shiny in the wrong places, the cuffs a 1/4 inch too short. On his wrist, a watch designed to look like a Rolex from 10 feet away and fool absolutely no one from 5. Craig moved through the dining room like he owned it, laughing too loud at VIP tables, calling regulars by first name, clapping shoulders he had no business clapping. Every smile aimed upward, every order aimed down. Craig spotted Nathan mopping near the kitchen corridor. He walked over, leaned in close enough that Nathan could smell his cologne, sharp, synthetic, oversprayed, and said, "There's a toilet situation in the VIP lounge. Take your bucket, go through the main dining room, not the back hallway, the dining room." Nathan understood. The back hallway was faster. The dining room was the point. Craig wanted every guest to see the black janitor hauling a mop bucket past their filet mignon. Nathan picked up the bucket and walked straight through. $80 plates, $90 bottles. A black man with bleach-stained gloves carrying dirty water between tables of people who'd never carried anything heavier than a briefcase. A few guests wrinkled their noses. One woman pulled her purse closer. Nobody said a word. Craig watched from the host stand, arms crossed, satisfied. Then there was Douglas Pratt. He arrived every evening around 7. Same table, center of the room, maximum visibility. Mid-40s, pink shirt, unbuttoned, 2 buttons too many. A gold ring thick enough to use as a doorstop. Red face, loud voice. The kind of laugh that made waitresses flinch. He owned a chain of car dealerships, wealthy enough to demand attention, not wealthy enough to deserve it. Douglas treated the Belmont like his living room, and the staff like furniture. Nathan watched, Nathan wrote. In the leather journal under the Belmont entry, manager Craig Bellman. Inflates wine invoices, pockets the margin, prioritizes VIP tables, ignores walk-ins, humiliates junior staff publicly for control, requires removal. Below that, kitchen, 2 line cooks skimming protein orders, approximately $1,200 per month in unaccounted inventory. Below that, guest Douglas Pratt. Regulars like him set the culture. Staff mirrors what management tolerates. Nathan closed the journal and slid it into his back pocket. 3 days at the Belmont. 3 days of mopping floors. Nobody thanked him for eating lunch alone on the concrete steps behind the kitchen and fielding commands from a manager who never once used his name. But on day 1, between the breakfast rush and the lunch prep, a waitress with a loose ponytail and tired blue eyes had walked past him in the corridor. She didn't slow down, didn't stop, just looked him in the eye and said, "Mornin'." One word, directed at him, not an order, not a complaint, the only one in 3 days. And on day 2, she walked past again. Didn't say anything, but 5 minutes later, a glass of ice water appeared on the supply cart next to his mop. Nathan looked up. She was already gone. He opened the journal that night and wrote, Day 2, the waitress again. Didn't ask, just brought water. It started small, the way cruelty always does. Day 2. Lunch rush. The VIP section was full. 12 tables, all occupied. Every seat worth $100 check minimum. Craig Bellman stood at the entrance to the lounge, arms folded, scanning the room like a man guarding his kingdom. Then he turned, found Nathan restocking paper towels in the supply hallway, and snapped his fingers. VIP floor needs a touch-up. Now. Nathan looked at the hallway clock. 12:15. Peak service. Every table had food on it. Now, Craig repeated. And use the front entrance. Guests like to see a clean operation in action. A clean operation. That was the phrase he used. What he meant was, get on your knees and mop in front of people eating Wagyu. Nathan carried the bucket through the front entrance of the VIP lounge. 12 tables, 40-something guests. He dipped the mop and started working. A woman in pearls pulled her Chanel bag off the floor and onto her lap. A man in a navy suit shifted his chair 6 inches to the left without looking up. 2 businessmen at a corner table watched the black janitor push gray water across polished stone and went right back to their conversation about golf handicaps. Craig observed from the doorway. When Nathan finished and wheeled the bucket back out, Craig turned to a junior waiter standing nearby and said loud enough to carry, "See, that's what compliance looks like." The junior waiter looked at the floor. That evening, Douglas Pratt arrived at his usual table, center of the room, pink shirt, gold ring. 3 fingers of Macallan 18 before the appetizer hit the table. His guest tonight was a business partner, another dealership owner from Savannah, thick neck, loud tie, matching laugh. Nathan was mopping near the south wall when Douglas stretched his leg out and kicked the bucket. Not bumped, kicked. The bucket tipped. Gray water fanned across the tile, splashing the base of a nearby table. Silverware rattled. A woman gasped. Douglas looked down at the puddle, then up at Nathan and grinned. At least he's good for something. The table erupted. His partner slapped the tablecloth, laughing. Douglas raised his glass like he'd just delivered a punchline at a comedy club. Nathan got on his knees, pulled a rag from his back pocket, wiped the floor by hand inches from Douglas Pratt's Italian loafers. He didn't look up, didn't say a word. Wrung the rag out into the tipped bucket, set it upright, and wheeled it away. Nobody apologized. Nobody even paused their meal. Nathan wrote in the journal that night, Pratt kicked the bucket deliberately. No staff intervened, no guest objected. Culture is set from the top, and the top is rotten. Day 3. The locker room behind the kitchen. Nathan opened his locker at noon to grab the sandwich he'd packed that morning. Turkey on wheat, a bruised apple, a bottle of water. The shelf was empty. He looked down. The sandwich was in the trash can. Wrapper torn open, apple crushed, water bottle cap unscrewed, liquid poured out over the bread. On the inside of his locker door, written in red marker capital letters, "Janitors don't eat here." 2 line cooks, Jake and Tommy, leaned against the far wall. Jake had his arms crossed. Tommy was smirking. Neither said a word. They didn't need to. The message was the point. Nathan closed the locker, walked out. Sat on the concrete steps behind the kitchen. Same spot as yesterday and the day before. No food, no water. Just the leather journal and a pen. Elena came through the back door, carrying a tray of dirty glasses. She stopped when she saw him. Same spot. No food again. "You okay?" Nathan looked up, nodded once. Elena didn't push. She set the tray down on the step, studied his face for a moment, then walked back inside. But something nagged at her. She'd seen tired before. She'd seen beaten down. Her father wore that look every day for 30 years. This wasn't that. Nathan's eyes didn't look defeated. They looked like they were cataloging, measuring, filing things away behind a calm that didn't match a man who just had his lunch thrown in the garbage, who mops floors but watches people like he's keeping score. She didn't have an answer, but she couldn't stop asking the question. Friday night. The Belmont Grand was full, every table taken, every glass filled. Amber light pooled across white tablecloths like spilled honey. The jazz trio in the corner played something slow and expensive, the kind of music designed to make rich people feel richer. 83 guests, according to the reservation book. Waiters weaving between tables with trays balanced on fingertips. Laughter layered over the clink of crystal. The air smelled like seared butter red wine and perfume that cost more than Elena's rent. Nathan was mopping the corridor between the main dining room and the restrooms. Gray uniform, rubber gloves, head down. The same black man who'd been invisible for 3 days, and he planned to stay that way for one more night before writing his final report. Douglas Pratt sat at his usual table, center of the room, third scotch already sweating on the tablecloth. His face was redder than usual, his voice carried farther. Tonight his guest was a golf buddy, sunburned polo shirt, the kind of man who laughed before the joke was finished. Nathan pushed the mop bucket past Douglas's table. The wheel squeaked. Douglas reached out, not fast, not slow, deliberate, picked up his glass of Merlot and threw it across Nathan's chest. Red wine hit gray fabric and exploded outward like a wound opening. It soaked through to his skin, dripped from his collar down to his belt. splattered the white marble floor in a pattern that looked like something violent had happened. Because something violent had. Douglas leaned back in his chair and said loud enough for every table in the room to hear, "Somebody get this dirty rag out of my sight." His golf buddy laughed. A short barking sound, then silence. Craig Bellman materialized within seconds. He rushed to Douglas's table, not to Nathan. He leaned down and murmured an apology to Douglas for the disruption. Offered a fresh glass. Assured him the situation would be handled immediately. Then Craig turned to Nathan. He grabbed Nathan by the shoulder, steered him to the center of the dining room, dead center under the main chandelier, where every seat in the house had a clear line of sight, and ripped the apron off his chest. The fabric tore at the strap. Craig balled it up and threw it at Nathan's feet. His voice was a performance, pitched for the room. "You're done. People like you don't belong in a place like this. Pick up your mop and get out." The jazz trio stopped. The pianist's hands hovered over the keys like he wasn't sure if this was part of the evening's entertainment. 83 people. Forks down, glasses midair, every conversation dead. Nathan stood in the center of the room, wine soaking his shirt, apron crumpled at his feet, his fists clenched knuckles paling beneath dark skin. But he didn't move, didn't shout. His eyes swept the room the way a man surveys wreckage after a storm. Slow, steady, cataloging every face that looked away. 5 seconds of silence. 10, 15. Nobody moved. Then a tray hit a table so hard a water glass tipped over. Elena. She set the tray down, or more accurately, she slammed it, and stepped out from behind a foretop near the window. Her hands were shaking. Her jaw was set. She walked across the dining room, not fast, not slow. The kind of walk that said she'd already decided what she was going to do, and the only question left was how loud. She bent down, picked up Nathan's apron off the marble floor, folded it, neatly, like it mattered, like it was worth something. Then she held it out to him with both hands. She turned to Craig. Her voice didn't shake. It should have. She was about to lose everything, but it didn't. "He mopped your floors for 3 days, and you couldn't even learn his name. He's not the one who doesn't belong here." She turned to Douglas, the man with the empty wine glass and the full wallet, and the face going from red to white. "You just ruined a man's shirt and laughed about it. That wine costs less than his dignity." Craig's mouth opened. "You're fired. Right now. Walk out or I'll—" Elena reached behind her back, untied her own apron, the same faded black one she'd worn for 2 years, washed until the stitching frayed. She folded it once, set it on the nearest table and said, "Then I quit." She took Nathan's hand. His fingers were still wet with wine. She didn't care. She walked him through the dining room, past 83 faces frozen in various shades of shame and surprise, through the front door and out into the warm Atlanta night. Behind them, the jazz pianist slowly put his hands back on the keys. But nobody was listening anymore. Nathan looked down at Elena's hand holding his. Small. Ink-stained fingertips, dish soap and antiseptic. In 8 months and 12 hotels, no one had ever held his hand. He didn't reach for the journal that night. For the first time, he didn't need to write it down to remember. They walked 3 blocks without speaking. The Belmont Grand shrank behind them, all that amber light and crystal and cruelty, folding into the distance like a door closing. The Atlanta night wrapped around them instead, humid, heavy. The kind of summer air that sticks to your skin and makes everything feel slower than it is. Elena walked half a step ahead, determined, like she had a destination. Nathan followed, still wearing the wine-soaked uniform, the stain on his chest drying dark in the heat. She stopped in front of a burger joint called Lucky's, neon green sign buzzing above the door, plastic chairs on the sidewalk, a ceiling fan spinning inside that wobbled with every rotation. The kind of place that served everything in paper baskets and didn't apologize for it. Elena pulled out her tips from the night, a crumpled 20, a 5, and a 1. $26. Everything she'd earned before she'd thrown her career into the center of a dining room. 2 cheeseburgers, 2 Cokes, extra pickles on both. She carried the baskets outside, set one in front of Nathan, sat down across from him on a plastic chair that rocked on uneven legs. And for the first time since he'd walked into the Belmont Grand 3 days ago, someone shared a meal with him. They ate in silence for a minute. Then Elena wiped her mouth with a napkin and said, "I just realized something embarrassing. I got you fired, and I don't even know your name." Nathan almost laughed. Almost. Nathan. Elena. She held out her hand, ketchup on her thumb. He shook it anyway. She talked the way people talk when they've been carrying things alone for too long, and suddenly find someone willing to listen. Her father, Henry. The carpenter who built furniture that lasted generations and now couldn't climb a flight of stairs. The hospital bills, $4,200 a month, insurance covering barely more than half. The notebook in her apron pocket where she tracked his medications, his oxygen levels, his good days and bad days. "I want to open a bakery someday," she said, looking at the neon sign like it was a window into a different life. "Small one, nothing fancy, just bread and pastries and a couple tables where people can sit and not be in a hurry." Nathan told her he was between jobs, that he liked reading history mostly and architecture, that he'd once wanted to design buildings before life pulled him in a different direction. All of it true, every word. He just left out the part where the different direction was a $3.6 billion hotel empire. Elena didn't ask what kind of work he did, didn't ask where he lived, didn't ask anything that required him to lie more than he already was by sitting there in a janitor's uniform. Nathan looked at her across the plastic table, blue eyes catching green neon, ketchup still on her thumb, hair falling loose from the ponytail she'd worn for 14 hours. No makeup, no pretense, no angle. He'd sat across from women in Michelin-star restaurants wearing dresses that cost 5 figures, and none of them had ever made him feel what he felt right now, sitting on a wobbly plastic chair eating a $6 burger bought with someone else's last $26. "Why did you do it?" he asked. "You lost your job." Elena chewed, swallowed, looked at him like the answer was so obvious it barely needed saying. "My dad used to tell me a man's work doesn't define his worth. How people treat the working man, that defines theirs." She paused. Craig defined himself tonight. So did every person who stayed quiet. Nathan didn't respond. He couldn't, not without his voice breaking. Elena stood up, brushed the crumbs off her jeans. "I gotta go. Dad's medication is at 11. She tossed her napkin in the basket, gave him a half smile, and walked away. Didn't ask for his number, didn't suggest they meet again. Just gone sneakers on warm pavement, ponytail swinging, disappearing around a corner like she hadn't just rearranged his entire world. Nathan sat alone under the green neon. He pulled out the leather journal, turned to the last page, the one he'd kept blank for 8 months, the one reserved for a name that mattered. He uncapped the pen. Elena. Elena started at Rosie's on a Monday. The cafe sat 3 blocks from Atlanta General, a narrow storefront wedged between a laundromat and a nail salon, faded awning, mismatched chairs, a chalkboard menu with handwriting that leaned left. The coffee was decent, the tips were worse, and the owner, Rosie herself, a 60-year-old woman with reading glasses permanently perched on her forehead, paid in cash every Friday without asking questions. It was a step down from the Belmont Grand in every measurable way. But Elena could visit her father on her lunch break instead of taking 2 buses after a double shift. That math was simple enough. She was wiping down the counter on her 3rd day when the bell above the door jingled, and a tall black man in a faded gray jacket walked in. Same face, same quiet eyes, same hands that had held a mop 3 days ago and now held a paperback Hemingway, dog-eared spine cracked. Elena smiled before she could stop herself. The janitor who didn't pick up his mop. Nathan looked up. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but close. The waitress who picked it up for me. He ordered black coffee, sat in a corner booth by the window, read his book, stayed for 2 hours, left a $5 tip on a $3 cup. He came back the next day, and the next, and every day after that for 3 weeks. The conversations grew the way conversations do between two people who are lonely but too proud to say so, slowly, then all at once. Elena talked about her father between orders. Henry had a good day, Tuesday, sat up, asked for his reading glasses, tried to sketch a new bird design on a napkin. Wednesday was bad. Oxygen dropped to 88. The nurses adjusted his flow rate, and Elena sat in the hallway and stared at the wall until her break was over. Nathan listened. Not the way most people listen, half present, waiting for their turn to talk. He listened with his whole body, leaned forward, eyes locked. Like every word she said was being filed away somewhere important. He shared pieces too, careful ones. He told her he'd been in a relationship 3 years, thought it was real. Turned out she wanted what he had more than she wanted him. He didn't say Vanessa's name, didn't say Billionaire, just said, "She made me wonder if anyone would want me without the extras." Elena set down the coffee pot and looked at him. People show you who they are when they think no one's watching. You just got to pay attention. Nathan went quiet, because that was exactly what he'd been doing for 8 months. And she was the first person who passed. What Elena didn't know was that behind the gray jacket and the Hemingway novels, Nathan had already made a phone call. His chief medical advisor had pulled Henry Underwood's hospital records through a fabricated community health initiative. The evaluation came back within a week: advanced COPD, undertreated, deteriorating. A pulmonary specialist at Mayo Clinic could stabilize him, possibly reverse 2 years of damage. Cost $180,000. Nathan approved the funding with a single text message. But he didn't tell Elena. Not yet. If she found out who he was because he saved her father first, he'd never know if she chose him or chose gratitude. And he needed to know. After Vanessa, he needed to be sure. So he kept coming to Rosie's, kept ordering black coffee. Kept listening to Elena talk about bread recipes and oxygen levels and the wooden finch her father couldn't finish. On a Thursday evening 3 weeks in, they sat outside on the plastic chairs after Elena's shift ended. The sun was low. The laundromat next door hummed through the wall. Elena was mid-sentence about a sourdough starter she'd been nursing in her apartment, and Nathan reached across the gap between their chairs and took her hand. She stopped talking. Looked down at his fingers, dark against her pale skin. Warm, steady. She didn't pull away. She laced her fingers through his and kept talking about sourdough like nothing had changed. But everything had. Nathan had planned to tell her on a Saturday. He'd booked a corner table at a small Italian restaurant in Midtown, not one of his. Somewhere neutral. Somewhere that didn't have his name buried in the foundation. He'd written a letter by hand. 4 pages. The whole truth. Vanessa, the disguise, the 11 hotels, the blank page, the night she wrote her name on it. He was going to slide it across the table after the pasta and before the check and let her read it in her own time. That was the plan. The internet had a different one. It started with Tommy, the same line cook who'd crushed Nathan's sandwich and poured water over his bread and written, "Janitors don't eat here," in red marker on his locker. Guilt, it turned out, had a longer shelf life than cruelty. 3 weeks after the incident, Tommy couldn't sleep. He pulled the security footage from the kitchen server, a copy he'd made the night it happened originally to show his friends. Now it burned a hole in his conscience. He sent it to a reporter at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Anonymous email, no subject line, just the video file. The footage was 19 minutes long. It showed everything. Douglas Pratt throwing wine at a black janitor's chest. Craig Bellman dragging him to the center of the dining room, the apron hitting the floor. 83 guests frozen in silence. And then, a waitress slamming her tray, marching across the room, picking up the apron, folding it, and telling the manager to his face that the janitor wasn't the one who didn't belong. The paper ran it the next morning. By noon, it had 4 million views. By evening, every major network had picked it up. The hashtag Belmont Shame trended for 6 hours. Comment sections exploded. People wanted to know two things: who was the waitress and who was the janitor? The waitress was easy. A former Belmont employee confirmed her name, Elena Underwood, 25, currently working at a cafe called Rosie's. The internet loved her immediately. The janitor was harder. No employee records matched his face. Craig had never bothered entering his full information into the system. But a digital forensics team at a news station ran the footage through facial recognition software. The match came back within hours. Nathan Caldwell, founder and CEO of Caldwell Grand Hotels, net worth $3.6 billion, missing from public operations for 8 months, last known board appearance November of the previous year. The man Craig Bellman had thrown an apron at owned the building Craig worked in. The man Douglas Pratt had called a dirty rag signed the checks that kept the lights on. The news detonated. On a Tuesday evening, 3 black Maybach sedans pulled up to the front entrance of the Belmont Grand. Not the service entrance, the front. Valets scrambled. Doormen straightened their jackets. The lobby went quiet the way a room goes quiet when it knows something is about to end. 4 people stepped out. Nathan's CFO, a woman in a charcoal suit who hadn't smiled since 2019. The head of legal, the chief of security, and a senior board member who'd flown in from New York that morning specifically for this. They walked through the lobby in formation. Every employee they passed stopped moving. Craig Bellman stood behind the host stand, his face drained of color so fast it looked medical. His fingers gripped the edge of the podium. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Douglas Pratt was at his usual table. Center of the room, pink shirt, gold ring, fork raised. A bite of steak suspended in midair, slowly cooling. The CFO stopped in the center of the dining room, the exact spot where Nathan had stood dripping wine, and addressed the staff. Mr. Caldwell sends his regards. This property is under immediate review. Craig was terminated on the spot. Security escorted him out through the front door, the same door he'd pointed Nathan toward 3 weeks earlier. He carried nothing, said nothing. The glass doors closed behind him, and nobody watched him go. Douglas Pratt's VIP membership was revoked, all 42 properties, permanently. He was asked politely, firmly, publicly to leave the premises. He stood up, napkin still tucked in his collar, and walked past every table he'd ever held court at. This time, 80 pairs of eyes followed him to the door. Jake was suspended that night, fired by Friday. Tommy, the one who'd leaked the video, was given the option to resign. He took it. The entire management team of the Belmont Grand was dissolved and rebuilt within 2 weeks. And somewhere across town in a corner booth at Rosie's Cafe, Elena Underwood was pouring coffee and had no idea that the man who ordered black coffee every morning was on every news channel in the country. Elena found out on a Wednesday morning. She was refilling the drip coffee at Rosie's when her phone buzzed on the counter, then buzzed again, then again. 3 messages from a coworker at the Belmont she'd stayed in touch with, a link from her landlord, a missed call from a number she didn't recognize. She opened the first link. Nathan's face filled the screen. Same jawline, same dark brown eyes, same quiet expression she'd watched across a plastic table for 3 weeks. But the photo wasn't from Rosie's. It was from a Forbes profile. Black suit, boardroom behind him. A headline in bold, Billionaire CEO unmasked as janitor in viral Belmont video. Nathan Caldwell, founder, Caldwell Grand Hotels, 42 properties, $3.6 billion. Elena's phone slipped from her hand and cracked against the tile floor. She didn't pick it up for a long time. He came to Rosie's that afternoon, but not the Nathan she knew. This one walked through the door in a three-piece black suit, tailored so precisely it looked painted on. A Patek Philippe on his wrist that caught the light like a small sun. Oxford shoes polished to a mirror. Same face, same walk. Same man who'd sat in the corner booth reading Hemingway in a gray jacket, but the jacket was gone now, and so was the lie. Elena stood behind the counter, dish towel in her hand. She didn't move. Nathan sat down at the counter, not the corner booth, the counter. Close enough that she could smell his cologne, different from Craig's cheap synthetic spray. This was something quiet and expensive that she couldn't name. "Everything I told you was real," he said. "My name, the books I read, the way I feel when I'm with you." He paused. "The only thing I didn't tell you is what's in my bank account." Elena stared at him. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes weren't sad. They were furious. "You sat across from me on a sidewalk and watched me count out $26, my last $26 to buy burgers for a billionaire." Her voice was low. "Controller. Worse than yelling. Do you know how that feels?" Nathan opened his mouth. "Don't." She put the dish towel down, untied her apron second time in a month, and walked out the back door. Nathan didn't follow her, didn't call, didn't send flowers or jewelry or a check. He knew that every grand gesture would prove her right, that he was just another rich man who thought money could fix what money broke. Instead, he went home and wrote a letter. 4 pages, handwritten. Black ink on white paper, the handwriting slightly uneven because his hands were shaking. He told her everything. Vanessa, the texts, the prenuptial scheme, the night he sat in the penthouse and decided to disappear. 11 hotels, 8 months, hundreds of people who looked through him like glass. The leather journal with the blank page he'd carried everywhere, waiting for a name he was starting to believe didn't exist. And then a waitress, with tired blue eyes and ink-stained fingers, stood up in front of 83 people and threw away her job for a black man in a wine-soaked uniform she'd never spoken to. He wrote, "You didn't defend me because I was worth something. You defended me because you believed every person is. That's not something I can buy. That's not something I've ever found. And I'm terrified of losing it because of what's in my wallet." He left the letter at Rosie's the next morning. Sealed envelope, her name on the front. Elena read it alone in her apartment that night, sitting on the floor with her back against the bed. She read it twice, cried through the second time. She brought it to the hospital the next day. Henry read it in his bed, reading glasses low on his nose, oxygen tube humming. He set the letter down on his lap and looked at his daughter. "You're mad because he hid who he was." Henry's voice was thin but steady. "But think about it. He hid because he was afraid of losing you. Same reason you didn't tell me you quit the Belmont for 2 weeks." Elena looked at her father, then at the wooden finch on his bedside table. Unfinished, imperfect, still standing. She drove to Rosie's, walked in. Nathan was in the corner booth, black coffee, leather journal open, Hemingway face down on the table. He looked up when the bell jingled, and his eyes carried the expression of a man who'd already rehearsed what to say if she never came back. Elena sat down across from him, folded her hands on the table. "You still owe me $26. Nathan laughed, a real one, the kind that starts in the chest and cracks open something that's been sealed shut for 2 years. Elena reached across the table and closed the leather journal. "You don't need that anymore." 6 months later, Nathan Caldwell got married at the Belmont Grand. The same marble floor, the same dining room, the same front door Craig Bellman had pointed him toward. He chose it on purpose. 10,000 white roses. A 20-piece orchestra where the jazz trio used to sit. Red carpet from the front entrance to the rooftop altar on the 40th floor. 300 guests under open sky, the Atlanta sunset turning everything the color of warm honey. 2 empty chairs sat in the front row. Small ivory cards on each seat. Reserved for Craig Bellman. Reserved for Douglas Pratt. No one was meant to sit in them. They were not invitations. They were monuments, a silence louder than any toast. The orchestra dropped to a single cello. 300 heads turned. Henry Underwood appeared at the edge of the terrace. 4 months at the Mayo Clinic had done what 6 years couldn't. His breathing was steady. His hands had stopped trembling enough to finish one last project. A small wooden finch tucked into his breast pocket. Completed. Every feather carved. Elena stood beside him. White dress, simple. Hair down for the first time, soft waves past her shoulders. Blue eyes bright, ink-stained fingertips wrapped around white peonies. Henry wheeled himself forward. Elena matched his pace. A daughter letting her father do the one thing he'd been afraid he'd never live to do. Nathan waited at the end of the aisle. White suit. The same hands that had gripped a mop and clenched into fists while wine dripped down his chest, now shaking for a completely different reason. Henry pulled out the wooden finch and placed it in Nathan's palm. She's my finest work. Take care of her. Nathan closed his fingers around the bird. Couldn't speak. Elena took both his hands. And somewhere between the first tear and the vows, 300 people stood, not because the program told them to, but because they couldn't sit anymore. The wedding was live-streamed, 14 million views, but the clip people shared most was a 30-second cut of a black man in a wine-stained uniform, standing alone, and a waitress in a faded apron walking toward him when no one else would. If you were sitting in that restaurant that night, 83 guests, wine on the floor, a man standing alone, would you have stood up, or would you have stayed quiet? Be honest. Drop your answer in the comments. If this story hit you somewhere real, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're not subscribed yet, you know what to do.
Only 3 people in that room, not one moved, until a waitress making less than any of them slammed her tray down and said, "Enough." Nathan Caldwell spent 8 months walking through urban hotels. Hundreds of people saw him. Not one offered a meal, not one asked his name, and the only person who finally did was a woman cutting out her left $26 to buy him a cheeseburger. Elena didn't stand up because she knew he was a billionaire. He stood up because a carpenter who could barely brag taught her one thing. Your character isn't measured by how you treat the people above you. It's measured by how you treat the person who can do nothing for you. That's the test. And the most people in that room failed it without even knowing they were being tested. So, here's what I want you to say with tonight. How many times have you walked past someone and never once wondered what they were carrying? What if dignity isn't something people earn, but something we owe each other? Drop the answer in the comments. If this story hit you somewhere real, share it. Sometimes one share reaches the right person at the right time. Hit subscribe if you're new. We tell stories like this every week, and I'll see you in the next one.